And you've just heard Salou Salou by Union of Knives, taken from their new album, Start from the Endless, which is out this Tuesday. And I'm joined now by Chris Gordon from the band. Hello, Chris.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm really well, thanks. So tell us about this album and the songs on it. There's a big question to start.
Yeah, not bad. Um, well, this album is the conclusion to a double album. So the previous album was Endless from the start, and I'd always had it in my head it was going to be a double album, and I kind of wanted to release it all as one double album, but there just wasn't time to get everything done. So we released Endless from the start, and then we had a whole bunch of other tracks which were on the whole more cinematic, not Salou Salou, that's probably like the one kind of banger track on it, but the rest of them, they were a lot more spacious, and we just let them go where they wanted to go. And that was always my vision for this double album. The first album would be slightly more song based, and the other one would be a lot freer and more cinematic and stuff like that. So that's what Start from the Endless is. I've just been very careful to get the titles right in case I
So
confuse myself with them.
Does it still feel like your original vision in that way? Does it still feel like a double album?
It does, and that's why we use the same artwork with just in reverse, with a black background instead of a white background, and the first part, Endless from the Start, was white vinyl, and this is black vinyl. So all those kind of things tie it together to make it feel like this double album, even though they were released 3 years apart.
But it's interesting, and maybe this again was always meant to be, you call this second album, for want of a better term, more cinematic. It also seems to be a bit darker in tone. And yeah. Was it always that way, or has that changed over time?
Yeah, I mean that was the vision. I think when if you're going more expansive and cinematic, there's more room to explore places like that, and that's where I sometimes when people say darker or more depressing, I'm like, well, that's not what I find dark or depressing at all. I find that just interesting and full of intrigue rather than being too dark or depressing. But
I wouldn't say it's, I don't think it's depressing at all. Okay. What I mean by the kind of sound, I guess, what am I thinking? Maybe a kind of later Massive Attack where it was a bit heavier and that kind of feel. I guess, but expansive's maybe a good term as well, and cinematic. It's not a collection of songs, as you said, in the sense that the first one is. Sometimes they almost bleed into one another.
Yeah, a little bit. There's a little bit of crossover, but yes, I mean it. There's no denying it is the darker twin of the two. So.
And how did Union of Knives come about? Because you've been going for quite a wee while now.
Well, sort of, but although there was a massive hiatus in the middle. So Union of Knives, the history of it stems back actually to a band that you've probably never heard of called Regency Buck.
Right.
We're about in the late 1990s. So that was me and a guy, Dave McLean, and Paul Westwater. And Dave and Paul had made some music. I did a bit of singing on it for them, and then Dave went away and did tinkering. This was in the early days of kind of computer music, so he had his PC, and there was steam coming out of it, basically everything he was asking it to do. And he came up with some of the things that I'd sung, and he used the auto-tune plug-in a little bit and made some things. He made a really, really cool track called Free to Change Your Mind. And off the back of that track, we basically signed a huge publishing deal and a record deal with DreamWorks Records in America. So it just all happened, within the space of about 6 weeks after having that track. Obviously, we had other tracks because they weren't going to sign us on one track. And then for reasons that are, well known in the record industry, that whole thing just didn't quite pan out. But me and Dave kept working together. Paul disappeared off to San Francisco, where he still lives, but me and Dave kept working together. And, we made some more music, and eventually that's what Union of Knives became. There was some tracks that we made at the tail end of this Regency Buck thing that became Union of Knives tracks on the first album. And then we got Craig Grant in as well to sing. He was just another young artist that I'd been working with. And I got because the whole nature of it, I wanted it to be more collaborative, not just to be my singing on it, to be other voices. Hence having Anthony on the last couple of albums heavily featured as well. So that was my vision for it, that which was different to the Regency vision, where it was just a set formula or a set bunch of people in the band. Union of Knives, I always had this vision that it could be looser and just bring in guest vocalists, and more like a kind of Massive Attack thing where they have different singers on different tracks, but still with me potentially singing some of the tracks as and when I wanted to, or could be bothered with my own voice.
And that's interesting. And you're talking about, getting signed up and a publishing deal and everything. When that didn't go as you maybe thought it might, was that a period in music where things were just changing? Because I always think the kind of mid to late 90s was the last hurrah of selling a lot of, CDs or whatever it might be. And then things kind of changed as we moved into the millennium. Was that part of it? Things were changing?
I mean, I don't think so much with the way that deal didn't pan out. That, believe it or not, that was about my third major record deal by that point, and obviously the other two hadn't quite panned. The first one kind of did, but they hadn't panned out exactly or in the way that you might hope when you first sign it. So when this one didn't pan out, I was just, oh, no worries, let's just see what happens from here. But by that point, I was in my 30s, and I was more interested in producing anyway. So I was kind of moving into that. And really, Union of Knives just came off the back of that, where we had these tracks, somebody heard them, got really interested in them. I was trying to more sell myself as a producer, but they loved this and persuaded us to sign another record deal and, get a band together and do all that stuff again. So that was 2006, and then on to about 2008, 2009. And then a massive hiatus that was mostly due to me having kids and just not wanting to be away and wanting to be there for that period in their lives.
Yeah. But were you still writing music? Were you still thinking about future releases even during that period, or was it just like, no, I'm parking that for now?
I mean, I think in my head at the time that I made that decision, I parked it, like, not the producing, that's something I was going to keep doing for sure, but just there was just like an action in my head that I had to make that just said, right, just close the doors on that for now. And it's not like I was ruling it out completely in the future, but definitely just put that side of it away, put that side where you're fronting a band or whatever completely to one side for the time being. But then my attitude towards it softened through the years, and for the Union of Knives stuff, like meeting Anthony and working with him was a big part of being re-inspired to actually play some gigs and stuff. Like, not that we played that many gigs, they're extremely rare, but I don't think I would be doing it except for having him at my side, because he's a great guy.
And in terms of influences on the music, do you come with shared influences, or is it basically your musical vision and then other people bring what they do to it rather than any kind of influence?
If it's possible, it's a bit of both. Like, I like to be inspired by what other people bring. So I'm not, when Anthony comes in and sings on something, I'm just like, listen to this, do your thing, and then there might be a bit of back and forth. But he works really quickly as well, which is great for me. So, or if I'm working with another musician, I might just send, like on the previous album with Helen from Ladytron, I would just send her some stuff because that was in the middle of the lockdown. So I would just send her some stuff, and then she would bring me back some files, wee bit of back and forth, and then away we go. So very much I like to just give people space to bring what they can bring to the equation, and then sort of bounce off of that myself a little bit.
And was World Circumstance the reason that there is this gap between the two releases, between the start of the Endless and the Endless from the start?
No, not really, Alistair. That's more just having time to complete the second part of the opus. It's actually been finished for well over a year, but it's just then finding the time, finding a little bit of space in my schedule where I could be like, okay, I can deal with that then. But
and you've said you've been making music and releasing music for quite a while. how has it changed over the years? How different is it today, if it is?
I mean, completely different. There's two sides to how it is now. I think obviously it's so much easier and less expensive to be able to produce like professional sounding music and release it, to the world.
Yeah.
Which is a great thing in many ways, but it also means, as I'm sure you experience, working in a radio station, just a complete saturation of things. And how the hell are you supposed to work your way through, every new release every week, which is, not something that I pay attention to, but I'm sure that you do. And a lot of it obviously is utter crap, and finding then the 5-10% that is definitely worth listening to is a job and a half that I don't envy you. So that side of it has changed massively, because back, say, when I signed the first record deal in about 1993, having a record deal was the only way to do things. And more, I mean, you could have an indie deal and you could sort of fanny about, but the quality of recordings, I don't remember if you remember you probably will, the chart show from years ago.
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah.
Used to have the indie chart on it. And I didn't really understand what indie music was then. And of course, everything then was like limited by budgets, because you could go into a budget recording studio and make an okay sounding demo in the 80s. But if you wanted a really great sounding record, you had to spend, thousands and thousands of pounds on a top quality studio. And that's when you could get that level of quality. Whereas now, I'm sitting talking to you on a MacBook, and I can make something that sounds that good just sitting here on a pair of headphones, basically.
Yeah, it was interesting. I used to buy the ink, like the melody makers of the NME had their own indie charts, and I was never quite sure why. There was this kind of different chart, and it was almost like, well, these are for the bands that can't afford, to pay kind of any money for these things. And so for me, some of the best music was in those charts, but
absolutely,
it was interesting, that distinction back then. And then that kind of changed when bands who were clearly getting big money were still being called indie. Oasis were being called an indie band when they were more money.
Then it's more when indie became a sound rather than actually a definition to do with a label being independent.
Yeah, that's right. And what you're saying is absolutely true. If you trying to get your record kind of noticed when there's just all this stuff coming out must be very, very difficult, in terms of, it's almost like people are looking for the new. I think that's true in everything. They're looking for the next thing. They don't kind of stick very rarely with what's been around, even if it's for a month or something like that.
Which I think is completely fair enough. That's, and from my point of view, I'll stick my hat in the ring and say, here's our record, but I'm not going to get upset if people are more interested in a brand new thing of young kids, because I was young once and I needed that attention, much more than I do now. This is like something that I do for personal satisfaction, and getting some good feedback from, fans that have stuck with it through the years is great as well. But for me, it's not like the be all and end all. It's not a disaster if I'm not getting the level of attention that I feel the record deserves,
Yeah. What made me think, I was watching a documentary on hair metal from the 80s the other night. Don't ask me why. But the way it was a lot of it was concentrated in LA, and particularly in Hollywood. And there was a guy on saying at that time, it was, maybe 1 out of 10 bands that were kicking about were getting signed. They were getting contracts and signed up. Now, hardly any of them eventually made it. But, there was a time, I think, where it was perhaps getting signed to a major label, or even a subsidiary of a major label, was much more likely than it is now. It seems almost impossible now.
Yeah, it feels, with very few exceptions, it feels like you have to carve your own way a little bit as a young band. You have to sort of show that you're capable of creating some success on your own, and then maybe a label might come in and help you take it to another level.
Yeah.
That's why, because I work with a lot of younger bands, and I'm always at pains to tell them, look, man, nobody's going to do this for you. You think this manager is going to come along and just scoop you up and sort everything out. You just need to graft and do all your horrible social media stuff, which some people are obviously way better at than others.
Yeah.
You need to do all that stuff, try and build a following, get your shows packed, and then, you know, then you've got something to show people that that you can draw attention to yourself, and they can scale that up, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting the way I think that that's working at the moment, and how the shift between making music and promoting music seems to have, you know, skewed from what it was previously. And you mentioned live shows and kind of how rare Union of Knives live shows are. But you are going to be playing the Hug and Pint, I think, on April the 6th. Is that right? That's right, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
What can we expect from that? Have you got, you know, other supports, or is that not settled yet?
There is a support, but I can't actually announce who they are yet. I can tell until a couple of days before the show. So they're friends of ours, and it's a kind of surprise guest thing. But they have a show in the week leading up to it, so we've kind of said, look, we don't. There's no pressure to announce it because it's pretty much sold out anyway.
Yeah,
so you don't need them to help sell extra tickets or anything.
So just watch this space.
Yes, watch this space. We'll announce it a couple of days before on our social media stuff.
And
I mean, we're looking forward to this gig. Unfortunately, Pete, the drummer, can't make this one, but we've got another young chap in, Sam Layton, who's excellent, and kind of looking forward to playing with him. It'll be a slightly different dynamic with him, and my wife Lucy will be joining us on stage to do all the female parts. She sings on, I think the track you're going to play after this is "I Took My Rage from the Sun," so she does the lead vocals on that track.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah.
And are there plans to maybe play other live shows, or?
There's nothing booked as it stands. I would never rule it out. It's just with Anthony's schedule and all my stuff, organizing anything is a bit of a nightmare. And that's why, as I say, this album was finished for about a year before it even came out. But I would never rule it out, but there's nothing as it stands booked.
And at the moment, is it just focusing on the Union of Knives stuff, or have you got other things that you're working on that you can tell us about?
Well, I don't know if you know the band I was talking about that signed the first deal way back in the early 90s is called Baby Chaos. And they were a sort of rock band that were kicking about in the 90s. And then, much like with Union of Knives, we took a 20-year hiatus while I was off doing other things. And then we started making music again about 2015, 2016. And we've released another couple of albums just because this is pals I grew up with. We're all still pals. It's a good way of getting together, and we still make some music and record it. So there is another album that's kind of half done with that, but it took a back seat so far this year while I'm sorting the Union of Knives thing out. Hopefully after, say a month after this album's released and the show's done, I can get stuck back into that, and then God knows when it'll be finished, but it will be finished at some point.
It will be finished. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it.
And this is Union of Knives, and I Took My Rage from the Sun.